Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video in our Prince Facts series. This is the series where we go through every Prince album one by one, digging deep to find the stories behind the songs. This time, we've got an album that is notable for many reasons. First of all, it's an album born of extreme and traumatic changes in Prince's life. It's also the first album released after Prince changed his name back to Prince, retiring the use of the love symbol as his actual artistic name. It's a very polarizing album that over the years has divided many fans. The fans who love it relish its warm production, the focus on live instrumentation with jazz influences, and the refusal to make a commercial pop record. The ones who don't like it will point to lyrics that are controversial, accusing Prince of preaching a religious agenda, and the so-called Darth Vader voice that pops up throughout the album. Of course, there's only one album we could be talking about here, The Rainbow Children. Before we go any further, I'd like to ask you to do us a favor, and that's subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, takes only a second, and your support is needed for us to continue making these videos. We'd also appreciate you hitting the like button and leaving us a comment. All these are simple but very helpful actions to help us keep our channel running. Thank you so much. Now let's do this thing. So, I struggled with making this video for a while, and for one main reason, our usual facts-based approach just didn't bear that much fruit. There's not actually a huge amount known about the recording of the songs on this album or how they came about. By all accounts, the whole album was recorded over a fairly short period of time, with more or less the same set of musicians, and it had an era that largely just came and went, with little notable events outside of the celebration event that summer as filmed by Kevin Smith, footage which we may finally get to see in the upcoming Netflix documentary series. Nevertheless, all of the things we mentioned in the intro are worth looking at. This is a seemingly rapid about turn from Prince to make a non-commercial, jazz-influenced, independently released album, right after attempting the exact opposite in the previous years with the polished, slinky pop major label record of Raven to the Joy Fantastic, heavy on radio push and promotion, and full of famous guest appearances. However, as we all know, and we covered in the previous video, the rave gambit didn't exactly work. So that's one reason why Prince would have decided to go in the completely opposite direction. Unfortunately, the other reason is far more tragic. You see, it's around this time frame that Prince lost not one but both of his parents. John L. Nelson, Prince's father, died 3 months before the release of the album, and his mother, Mattie Shaw, passed just a few months after the album release. It seems that neither death was unexpected, with Mattie's obituary noting that she passed following a long period of illness. John had been many years older than Mattie and well into his 80s at the time of his passing. It seems quite likely that their declining health had been known to Prince for quite some time. And although nobody can judge anyone for how they react to the passing of close family members, it's worth pointing out that this time frame coincides with Prince's religious conversion to the Jehovah's Witness faith, the kind of life choice that often accompanies major changes elsewhere in one's life. Although over the years it would impact his work to different degrees, it's the Rainbow Children album where this change of faith is most apparent. The album has a storyline that seems to be in line with his new beliefs, with the titular Rainbow Children going about the work of building a new nation with accurate understanding of God and his laws, who go door to door in search of those willing to do the work. The door-to-door reference is, of course, not exactly subtle in its allusions to the common activities of the Jehovah's Witnesses. The 10-minute-long title track opens the album and sets the tone for the rest of the album with both its narrative and warm jazzy feel. Unlike the majority of the albums we've covered in this series, not much is currently known about the specific recording dates. Although the lyrics of this song do take some time to understand, certainly the return and slight alteration of the chant originally from Controversy, reproduction of the New Breed leader's stand-up Organize, was welcomed by fans as an understood throwback. The Work Part 1, as a single, is the first Prince release following the name change, with the single appearing 6 months before the album, and Prince doing a deal with Napster as an official free download. And that wasn't the only instance of that happening. The song Mellow was offered in a similar way, with AOL as an official free download, but after the album release. More than anything else with this album, the elephant in the room is always how polarizing it is. It really felt like at the time and over the years that people were either really into this album or not at all. In fact, looking at back-to-back posts on forums, you can find a quote saying this album is quasi-mystical, intentionally confusing dross, immediately followed by another person saying it's a masterpiece. What's interesting is that musically there's a pretty good consensus of this being a solid album, but it tends to be the lyrics that people found off-putting, with many remarking that the whole vibe felt exclusionary and that this was not the Prince they fell in love with. One fan actually wrote that listening to the album made them wish they didn't understand English so that they could enjoy just the music in isolation. Perhaps in retrospect, it's better that this album mostly flew under the radar for those reasons. Over the years, I've often thought about exactly what it is that makes this album feel so singular in Prince's catalogue. It's not just the rapid about turn from the rave era, or his enthusiasm in referencing his then newly found faith, or the unusual but brilliant choice of using Kababi Bayok's Rain Case Quintet painting as the album cover, but it translates into the music too. There's a huge consistency to this album, a clear sequencing, a story. You've got the fact that every song has live drumming from John Blackwell, and most of the album has backing vocals from the four sisters, known as the group Millennia, who wouldn't appear on another Prince album. Simply put, The Rainbow Children is a statement, one story that has chapters. And maybe it's just me, but I struggle to think of the songs individually. I tend to either listen to the album as a whole or not at all. I don't think any of the songs have really ever made their way into any of my Prince playlists because pulling out a song from this album just feels strange, like ripping a chapter out of a book. I've gone years without listening to The Rainbow Children, and at other times I've listened to it a lot in a short space of time. But again, my appreciation of this album, and however that might have ebbed and flowed over the years, has always been as a whole, and never to do with individual songs. And that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it just is. But when I think about Prince's famous statement at the 2015 Grammy Awards, when he said, like books and Black Lives, albums still matter, it's his cohesive statement albums that I immediately think of, like this one, like Artificial Age, like Lovesexy. The Rainbow Children is an album that could be considered a commercial failure. It failed to chart at all in most countries, spending just 2 weeks in the Billboard 200 in the USA and peaking at number 109. But calling it a commercial failure seems wrong because it's pretty clear that Prince did not intend this album to be a commercial success. Although The Work Part 1 was released as a single, that happened 6 months prior to the release of the album, and there was no commercial single released to coincide with the album, only promos of She Loves Me For Me, and last December, the latter only in Japan. There were no music videos released for this album, and although of course a handful of the songs were regularly played on the accompanying One Night Alone tour throughout 2002, after the conclusion of that tour, almost none of them were ever played again, save one notable appearance of Muse to the Pharaoh at the earlier show of what would turn out to be Prince's final ever live performance in 2016, the Piano and a Microphone tour in Atlanta. One interesting thing to note about the Rainbow Children is Prince did something quite uncommon where he played the entire album to attendees at the Paisley Park celebration that year, months ahead of the album release, and allowed attending fans to ask him questions about it. Now, this was actually more or less the theme of the whole celebration. Now, for any other album, and still in most ways, such an event sounds like a dream come true. But unfortunately for some fans, this didn't end up being the case. Due to some of the controversial lyrics on this album, for example, the references to Jewish people, the Holocaust, and slavery, some fans were rubbed the wrong way and took the opportunity to ask Prince about them directly. It seems that, characteristically, Prince did not respond directly to the questions asked, but instead began addressing the crowd in somewhat of a preachy manner and espousing various parts of his newfound Jehovah's Witness faith that, according to some fans in attendance, felt exclusionary and left them upset. For a man who for most of his career sung about the values of inclusivity, this seemed to some a step in the wrong direction. Here is one direct quote I found from a well-known Prince fan named Shlomo who attended. He said, "The religious questions/comments were very deliberately divisive and ultimately manipulative. You were made to feel that if you didn't agree with his proselytizing, there was something wrong with you. At times it felt like very cultish tactics being used, and the manipulation of it made me feel very uneasy. By the end, I couldn't wait to get out. Now, it's important to note that I was not in attendance myself, and all this information comes from people who were. So if you were there and you know what I'm referencing here and have a different take on events, please feel free to leave us a comment with your memories. I'm sure that others who attended had a different take and didn't feel the same way, but ultimately it's interesting to hear all views from people who were there. Ultimately, The Rainbow Children is an independently released, theological, spiritual think piece with a paint palette of jazz, Egyptian mythology, Afrofuturism, and his Jehovah's Witness faith. It feels like a statement Prince just needed to get out of him, rather than it being anything with a great deal of planned commercial exploitation. These are not the songs you're going to hear in a Hollywood movie trailer or on a TV advert anytime soon, and that's okay. This album is a deep dive for when you're in the mood to really listen to the message that Prince was trying to convey at that time. And whether or not you agree with the positions and opinions he was putting forward at that time, what we can perhaps all agree on is the very fact that Prince was able to make a statement album like this decidedly uncommercial, Afrocentric jazz concept album just 2 years after releasing a polished major label pop album with guest appearances from major stars in the pop world, is an example of the bravery and the unexpected that we loved about him. I always said year in, year out when Prince was here that it didn't matter if I or anyone else dug whatever the new Prince album was at the time or didn't, because if we didn't, he'd be doing something different the next year. And when you think about an album like The Rainbow Children, sandwiched as it is between things like Raven to the Joy Fantastic and musicology, that's a level of bravery, freedom, a level of absolutely no F's given that we rarely see in music. And for that, how can we not be grateful? At the end of the day, everyone is on their own journey. And although this album and its associated events weren't smooth sailing for all fans, like everyone, Prince would continue to evolve and change, and wouldn't end up making another album with such a polarizing, religious-based worldview. In the end, the music is what lasts, and although I rarely listen to The Rainbow Children personally, it is an album that contains some fantastic pieces of music. What are your feelings on The Rainbow Children? Is this an album that resonates with you or not? There are no right or wrong answers, so let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'm Casey Rain, we are The Violet Reality, and we'd really appreciate it if you could like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. You can even hit the little bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our new videos. As some of you may have heard, I'm currently in between jobs for the first time in a long time, so hitting that subscribe button and helping us get a little more reach would really help us out. Peace and be wild, and we will catch you next time right here on The Violet Reality.
Hey, St. Paul here. Make sure you go subscribe to The Violet Reality, the funkiest channel on YouTube.